Alright, so hey guys, welcome to another Warframe video, and today we're gonna take a look at some of the most powerful weapons that we have in the game right now. And just to keep the video relatively short, I decided to pick 3 of what I consider to be the strongest primary, secondary, and melee weapons. And since the focus of today's video is big damage, we might as well use Chroma, whom I personally only use for big boss fights like the Eidolons or the spider fights in Orb Valleys, but a lot of people like to use him all the time just to boost the damage of their guns. Also, it is worth mentioning that if you are using Chroma all the time, it is not worth using base damage mods like Hornet Strike, Serration, Point Strike and Point Blank, because you're already getting obscene amounts of base damage multiplication from Chroma's Fury buff, so it's better to go for crit scaling or elemental mods. However, since I'm not using Chroma all the time, I'm still using base damage mods like Serration, because most of the time I'm going to be running with the Naros or Baruch or Frame like that. And before we start, I just quickly want to mention that I'm going to be showing the power of these weapons on level 150 Grineer Heavy Gunners, which have about 4.5 million effective health thanks to their armor scaling. So the first weapon that I chose is the Tsar Cannon. This weapon is absolutely fantastic. It does a ton of damage, it has a lot of crowd control, and it can proc a ton of status as well. And out of the 3 primaries that I chose, the Tsar is probably the most versatile and therefore the best for running regular missions. And as far as the build is concerned, I would recommend a hybrid setup where you scale both crit and status and you run corrosive so you can strip enemy armor with the little cluster bombs. The second primary that I chose is the Lens, which is in my eyes the best designed and one of the most damaging explosive primaries in the game. This one isn't as versatile as the Tsar because it doesn't have the crowd control from the knockdown, but it makes up for it with damage scaling because a lot of our damage is gonna come from slash procs which ignore armor and shields. Now when it comes to the build, I personally like to run Val Acceleration for more fire rate and then do a hybrid build with Viral and Hunter munitions. And the final weapon on our primary menu surprises absolutely no one because it is the Tigris Prime. This is just straight up the most damaging primary weapon in the game, and it has been the most damaging primary weapon in the game for a very long time. The amount of damage this weapon can do with a proper slash-based setup is absolutely ridiculous. You can one-shot enemies up to sort of level 150, 200, maybe even 250. But that's pretty much everything the weapon can do. It has no utility or versatility, and it just does a big boom and kills everything that dares stand in front of it. The build is also pretty much set in stone, with the only flexible slot being the third one that is Vigilante Armaments. Everything else has to stay in place or just not as effective or just straight up doesn't work. Moving on to secondaries, where we start off with basically any kit gun as long as you build it so that it has high crit and decent status so that you can run a hybrid build. Now you can build it just so you focus on crit and you have some big damage underneath that with elemental mods, and while you will get big damage in the beginning, it's not gonna scale very well once the enemies get a lot of armor. Though you don't have to go overboard with the status, about a 50% chance once it's fully kitted out is fine, so a setup like this is perfect. In at number 2, we have the Piranha Prime, which is an absolute crit monster and one of the very few weapons that pushes crit so hard it doesn't actually need status to perform really well in Endgame. It just does a lot of damage, though it does start to fall off a little bit after level 150 when it comes to heavily armored units. And when it comes to the build, you just want to scale a crap ton of crit and slap on some elemental damage on top of it. And finally, we have what is essentially the Tigris Prime of secondary weapons, the Akjagara Prime. Now the power of this one is once again in the combination of slash and viral, which means that it basically keeps doing damage forever, just like the Tigris Prime. So if for whatever reason you run into a level 1000 bombard, this or the Tigris Prime is the kind of weapon you want to have because you just bop them in the head and they die. Now there's actually a lot of secondary weapons that can do a lot of damage, mainly because they have access to more multi-shot and primed crit mods. So their hybrid builds scale really well, but these are the 3 that I personally feel are the best. And finally we have melee, starting off with any Zo, ideally of the Plague variety, that can run Condition Overload and Blood Rush, which is just an insane combination. Now this is not necessarily limited to Zos. Any melee weapon that can run Blood Rush and Condition Overload is gonna perform really well, but the thing about Zos, especially the Plague Zos, is they just do a lot of damage and you have a lot of control when constructing them so you can min-max the different stats for good damage. And the build is going to change a little bit based on the type of Zo that you're running, but you definitely want to squeeze in Blood Rush and Condition Overload with a little bit of status chance and some combo duration. In at number 2, we have the Redeemer Prime, and this is barely a melee weapon, especially if you wanted to do big damage, because the way to do big damage with the Redeemer Prime is to actually not hit things with it, but rather shoot things with a charge attack. The amount of damage this does is just absolutely ridiculous. And the best way to build this in my opinion is to simply go with 4 dual stat mods. I'm personally using Radiation and Viral, then get some damage attack speed, use Condition Overload and Amalgam Organ Shatter for the faster charge attacks. And finally at number 1 we have a weapon that once again surprised absolutely no one because it's a meme strike Atarax. I mean, look at it. It's just stupid. My god, the damage. Now, as much as people hate this setup, it's actually quite unique because you have no elemental damage on this whatsoever and you're just focusing on getting big red crit slash procs. So while the build might look a little bit weird and it's probably not gonna work very well on a lot of other weapons, it is perfect for the attacks. Now I want to finish the video off by saying that the amount of damage these weapons do is completely unnecessary for 99.99% of the game. And that's why I generally don't go for full damage setups and I'll put in some utility instead. I just don't do endurance runs anymore, so the chance of me fighting an enemy that's above level 150 outside of the simulacrum is essentially non-existent, so there is no point in me having that damage and I would rather put in reload speed and make the weapon feel better. But I do understand that sometimes doing obscene amounts of damage can be a lot of fun. I'm like that in Warframe sometimes, but I'm really like that in Path of Exile. I'm just trying to get as much damage as possible, and it is fun. So I wanted to put this video together to show you what kind of weapons you might want to use if you just want to do big damage. I know I'm probably not the guy that you go to for min-max top-notch setups. At the end of the day, I'm not the Zyme of the Bro variety, but I still hope you have enjoyed this video and it will help you achieve the biggest of damage. And as always, I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.
Song of sons and